Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today. Today we're going to take a look at Sage Fixed Assets. We're joined by Wayne Austin, a sales engineer with Sage. And just want to remind you all, like usual, we are recording this presentation and we'll make it available to you. So if you want to share it with coworkers, family, friends, your grandmother, aunt, uncle, anyone you know that needs a better way to manage their fixed assets, we'd certainly appreciate that. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Wayne. Wayne, do you want to talk us through some of the introduction here on what Sage Fixed Assets is, and then we'll go right into the demo.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for your time today. During this discussion and product demonstration, we're going to be covering the Sage Fixed Assets solution. This is a complete asset lifecycle solution and very, very scalable as well. So be it startup, mid-market company range, or large enterprise environment, you will find that the 4 modules built into the system will be able to cover managing your assets through full life cycles, including from CIP through the end. So some of the things you'll be able to see in this demonstration is how you're going to be able to track and manage your assets, how are you going to be able to reduce risk surrounding tax and finance compliance. Are you going to be able to reduce redundant entries? Because one of the things you'll see, it integrates with most of our other ERP products, as well as most third-party products. You'll also be able to help, we're going to be able to help you maintain your ledger registry and be more efficient with how you're managing that portion of your business. And again, we do have the capability of integrating with all of our Sage ERP products, as well as third-party products, which would just require some customization. Next slide, please. Okay, so the areas of the solution I'm going to be covering today. I'm going to be starting with the depreciation modules. And the depreciation module is where you're going to be able to take advantage of updated IRS tax rules to really effectively manage your depreciation regardless of your type of entity. So if you're a government or nonprofit, standard U.S. company, you'll be able to effectively take advantage of all of the U.S. tax rules for the U.S. companies. The Canadian tax rules are included. So if you have to file a T2S8, for example, you'll be able to handle all of that portion of it in the depreciation modules, as well as be able to run projections to see what your future depreciation performance is going to be in future years, for example. The planning module will cover handling your CIPs if you're doing renovations, or for those of you in the manufacturing side, you're retooling a piece of manufacturing equipment or doing upgrades. You can actually manage that portion in the planning module, and once the project's complete, you can actually send those line items over to become fixed assets to start depreciation. The tracking module is going to help you if you're doing physical inventory and reconciliation. In other words, verifying that you have what you're supposed to have, where you're supposed to have it. Additionally, built on Crystal Reports platform, you're going to be able to do quite a bit of standard reports inside the software and customize those reports within the solution. But for those of you that have a need to go to really advanced customization, you will be able to do that in a full version of Crystal Reports. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and go into starting the demonstration of the product and walk through starting with the depreciation module. Okay, so I'm actually going to be using the network version of our depreciation module. You can get, excuse me, a standalone version or a network version for multi-user. And there's also a Premier version, which runs on an SQL platform for those of you that will have much larger numbers of assets. Typically, the transition point from the network to SQL Server version would be customers running 20, 30,000 assets or more. The Premier version, which runs on the SQL platform, will handle over 1 million assets. So that would be the solution used in much larger asset count type organizations. Now, I'm going to start off under the System Administration tab just to show you a few important things in this area. If you need to, for example, make any type of changes to your company settings, you can actually go into edit organization, make those changes to fiscal year, things like that. If you're running an alternate reporting period where you're on a 445 or that type of fiscal year, you would need to be on the Premier version, the SQL Server version, which handles alternate reporting periods. Now, if you're in an environment where you're using multiple legal entities, you will actually be able to go in and copy settings from one company to the next. So, for example, you can create your first organization, do any customization you need there, and you can selectively copy templates, custom reports, custom depreciation methods to the subsequent companies, so you basically don't have to reinvent the wheel. Short years are supported, and you can also set various book overrides. Now, if you are a multi-site type organization where you have multiple locations, and one of the things you would need to be doing is transferring assets between locations or between sites or cost centers, you can choose how the system handles those types of activities by choosing transferring by location or department or GL account codes, so whatever makes sense for your particular workflow. Now, for those of you that would be looking at doing a multi-user type environment, you will have the ability to create more restrictive profiles. For example, your controller accounting department may need full access, but you may have folks in other areas of the company that you may want to be able to restrict access, for example. You may want to be able to allow them to add assets, and you can certainly do that, but at the same token, let's say you want to prevent those users from running depreciation or being able to set period or closes or clear period closes. So you have quite a bit of flexibility in how you can manage user access permissions. Windows authentication is also supported, so I'm sure most of your company's IT staff will want to ask about that particular area. Now, this is also where you would back up and restore your company data, and you'd certainly want to ensure that you're doing backups routinely, and that's going to help you get back to exactly where you were if you're doing frequent backups. As we know, for example, hardware fails. This is an on-premise solution, so your server goes down or your workstation you had to client install goes down. If you've been backing up your company routinely, then you can easily restore back to the last backup. Now, you can create multiple databases, multiple companies with each databases, so it's a great way of creating, for example, a test environment if you need to be able to train new users, for example, but you don't want to put your production data at risk. You can certainly do that. Let me go ahead and reopen company, and we will jump right in. Now, this is a neat feature that many accounting departments really like. You get a quick overview of what's going on with the overall status of your assets. And this information can be viewed individually by books as well. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it in the tax book. But as you can see here, you can actually easily see what the total net value of my assets are in this particular sample data. I've got 2.8 million approximately. It's even broken down by the status of all of those assets. So for example, you can see here I've got my active assets and the value of that, the total count of those assets, as well as my disposed, inactive, or transferred assets. You can also quickly see what's been placed in service by quarter. So in the case of you folks that are handling the tax book, as you know, if Q4 you cross that 40% placed in service threshold, you would need to switch to a mid-quarter convention, which is actually one of the mass switches you can easily do in the system, and I'll show you that a bit later on. You can also quickly see the remaining life of your assets. So for example, in my sample data here, 61% are fully depreciated. So for example, that might help me with forecasting when to start budgeting for replacing assets that are past end of depreciation life, but may also be at the end of their useful life. I can quickly see a 5-year acquisition comparison, and I can also see a quick depreciation comparison by book. But you can choose not to see this information at the startup, because you can certainly access it anytime. Now, I'm jumping to my full asset list view. So as you can see in this particular company, if you look in the upper right portion here, I've got 420 assets in my particular sample data. Now, one of the things you may want to do, especially if you're a multiple site, is you may want to be able to segment that data by creating groups, for example, and you can do this on a variety of criteria. For example, I've go to my store number 1 location, I've got 72 assets there. And you can multi-layer the filters you're using for creating these groups. So for example, if I just want to see computer equipment at that location, I've got a group that I created based on that criteria using the location as well as the asset class. Reason you may want to do that is, for example, if you want to take some type of a group action on a large group of assets, you can easily identify them by creating a group or doing a search, quickly select all, and I can now do a bulk disposal of these assets or bulk transfer of these assets if I wanted to be able to take mass action like that. Now, even if you don't have a group created for, a large group of assets like that, you can actually do a quick search. So, for example, I'm going to be vague in how I do my search. If I wanted to find, for example, any asset where the description field contained a particular keyword like computers, and I can do this based on any of these other groups, but I just want to be vague to show you how easy it is. I can find all computers, select all, and again take group action. For example, you're closing one location or moving a location, you can easily do that. You can do the same thing, for example, if you want to find all computers placed in service prior to a certain date, do mass action. In the case of the manufacturing world, if you're using one of your general information fields, for example, to determine when certain pieces of equipment are due for maintenance or calibration, for example, you could use that kind of a criteria where you're searching for calibration date is greater than July of 2000 and find all of your equipment that requires calibration within a certain date range. Do group action on that and find them all and quickly take action on whichever ones you choose to. Now, let me go back to my active assets here and talk a little bit about how you can easily create or edit these groups. So for example, the example I showed you where I was using a single criteria, I was simply just using that specific field for location, but you could certainly choose from any of the available fields and choose an operator accordingly. So in my case, I was being specific, and I've actually got a smart list created with all of my locations where I went ahead and selected the location I wanted to see. Now, to go further, as I said, you can actually layer these criteria where I'm using my location field as I did before, adding an additional criteria where I'm using my asset class, being specific again, and now I went ahead and selected the class of assets I wanted to see. And you can create as many of these filters as you need to so that you can really get a narrow or as wide a group of your assets as you choose to. Okay? Now, some of you may be doing physical inventories of your assets. So I want to point out a couple of things in this view. The column, first column here is the system number. The software automatically assigns a new system number to each line item that you add here. Now, the asset ID field is actually going to be your internal number. So if you're doing barcode tagging or have asset tags, system tags on your assets, you can actually utilize that column for that. So when you're actually using the tracking module to do a physical inventory, this is the field that barcode number would show up in. Now, you can easily change in the order of what's displayed here as far as the columns of information. You can determine what's visible, what's not visible. Just like you can in Excel, you can choose to remove a particular field, add another field, or even change the sort order. So that's actually quite easy to do. Now, if you notice now, my second and third columns both have a couple of symbols here. This little notebook type symbol means there's notes included in this asset. The paperclip means there's images attached. So let me go into the asset detail for this particular asset. Now, this particular asset is a delivery vehicle. So one of the types of ways you may want to use your notes, and you can use it for anything you want to, it's all clear text. You can type in whatever you want. So since this is actually a delivery vehicle, I'm actually using this to track my maintenance intervals, for example. On the image tab, you can actually attach images of the assets. So, and you can attach as many as you want to. You can also attach invoices of the assets. So this is going to come in handy at a couple of different points that are important to you. If you have pretty stringent audits, as you're going through an audit, your auditors are going to like having all of the associated information you have with the asset. You can scan and attach a variety of different file formats. So for example, if I wanted to create a new attachment, I can easily search for it locally. You can take PDFs, JPEGs, PNG file, even TIFF files such as an eFax, BMP files, or GIF files. So any of these file types that you can attach to the asset. So for example, if you have leased equipment, you may want to scan and attach that lease. If you've got assets that you're doing routine servicing on, routine maintenance, calibration, you want to attach that calibration report, you can attach it right here to that individual asset. So that when you're going back through and reviewing that asset, let's say you do have some sort of an issue later on, and you want to verify what the calibration results were, you can go to that asset, jump right in, and easily view that calibration report as an example. So there's really great ways that you can actually use that in your system. Additionally, as we know, there's been quite a lot of really nasty weather lately. Let's say one of your sites gets damaged. Some assets are damaged or destroyed. You've got to file an insurance claim. Another great way of proving the condition of that asset, especially let's say you've done some enhancement to that expensive piece of machinery, manufacturing equipment. You can actually attach all of the pieces here that you've added to it, images of it, paperwork showing the cost. And one of the things you can do, if you need to, for example, is revise acquisition value. So let's say you've got a piece of equipment that's been in service for several months or years even. You come in, you retool it, you've added some enhancement to it. You can do a couple of things. You can create another asset and use one of these general information fields to tie it to the original asset so that you can show the relationship, or you can keep it within the same asset because it essentially is the same asset, but you've just added capability. You can actually go in here and let's say I needed to add revise my acquisition value based on those upgrades I've done to this asset. You can actually do that, but if you make any changes to a field that's considered a critical depreciation field, so be it your property type, place in service date, the acquisition value, or depreciation method or estimated life, you will get this prompt. So the system kind of protects you from just changing things randomly. But what it's going to do is going to give you a choice. So in the case where you may have added an enhancement, improved the capability and added value to the asset, you want to make that effective from your current depreciation through date. Now, you will also get the choice if, let's say, you're doing monthly period closes, you can go back to that last period close. Now, in the case of, let's say, an asset that's been placed in service for a couple of months, when you added it to the depreciation module, you didn't have all of the invoices. You find a couple of invoices later that, oh, I made a mistake. I need to actually revise that original acquisition value. You can go back to place in service date. So you do have all of the options for your operational needs with how you manage that based on what your business processes call for. Just want to make sure I point that out. Now, I'll come back to those book fields shortly. I'm going to talk a little bit about these general information fields. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you can actually use your internal numbering, be it for your system tags, barcodes, or whatever the case may be, for your particular assets internally. So this would be that internal number. System number generated by our software. Now, there's some things you can do here to customize these fields. Like I've created smart lists with all of my locations. I've created a smart list with all of my GL account numbers. That's going to be helpful in eliminating errors, for example, because in the case of these GL account numbers, you may want to restrict entry. So it does read type ahead, but you may want to restrict it so that folks can only use select from one of the account numbers you've populated in the field and not just type something new in, because as you know, one character off is a completely different account number or an invalid account number. So this can kind of help eliminate errors by doing that. You can customize and rename any of these fields to whatever makes sense for you. So for example, if you've got vehicles, you may want to use one of these fields to track VIN numbers. If you've got assets that have serial numbers, model numbers, you can certainly use it for that. There's even a couple of custom date fields that you may want to use, and that's separate from your acquisition and place in service date. So for example, if you wanted to be able to rename one of these fields, I'm going to jump in here where you can customize it and show you that. So let's say, for example, you are an organization that does calibration and test equipment for the aviation industry, for example, or you have very high tolerance type manufacturing equipment that you need to make sure you're tracking when they've been last calibrated or serviced. You can rename one of these date fields for whatever it may be. You can call it calibration date. Okay, and track that particular field accordingly. And I'm going to go ahead and change that so you can easily see what that is. Now you see I just changed the name of that particular field from calibration, from manufacture date to calibration date. As you can see here now, its display name is completely different. So you can really customize it to what makes sense for you. Now, if you are using asset classes, for example, to track the type of assets, you can certainly build out your smart list for the asset classes you're using, include the description, and it'll display accordingly so that when you select that field, it'll actually populate that list and you can select from the type that you're using. Now, these other custom information fields will take up to 25 characters. So you can rename any of them for whatever you want the display name to be. Your description field, for example, will take up to 80 characters. So you can put a pretty lengthy description for whatever the type of asset may be. Your GL account number fields will actually take up to 100 characters. And of course, you can populate that information, restrict entry, as I was explaining earlier. But if you do want folks to be able to add new entries, you can actually allow that as well. Okay. So with it being able to take up to 100 characters, you can set the mask for whatever your organization is actually using, and it'll take any type of alphanumeric ASCII text. So whatever your numbering scheme is will be fine. If you're using locations, if you're a multi-location field, you can certainly do that. Now, keep in mind that any of these fields that you're not using, you can actually choose to hide that field. So the main thing you want to take away from this is that you want to be able to customize this so you are seeing the details you really want to see about the asset, and certainly hide anything you're not using. You can change the display order of any of these quite easily, so no problem there. Okay. Now, the other thing you may want to think of, if you're migrating, let's say, and hopefully you're not using Excel spreadsheets because you really just don't have enough security and functionality in that environment. But if you are migrating from Excel, for example, you can customize these fields if you want to keep the same type of nomenclature that you're using for your column headers, because you will be doing some type of field mapping as you bring these over from Excel into our system here. If you're using another piece of software to manage your assets currently, and you're going to be doing a migration to the software, you can actually export your asset list out to Excel, customize your column headers, whatever it may be, and import into the system. Now, on the back end of this, when you're doing your reporting, let's say you're doing your depreciation expense, general ledger, whatever it may be, net book value, you can actually sort and subtotal your reports based on multiple criteria on these fields. So, for example, if I want to run my depreciation expense report and I want to sort and subtotal by location first, and then maybe below that by asset class, and maybe below that by GL asset account number, you can actually do that as long as you've got those fields defined. Okay. Now, I'm going to jump back down to talking about the book information fields before. As you can see, there are 7 books. So you've got your tax, internal, or financial book, state, AMT, and ACE book. These two on the end are books that you can actually customize. So, for example, you want to use some type of alternate depreciation method and do a comparison, you can certainly do that. Now, for those of you handling the tax book, I want to point out a few things. Across all the books, you will see all of the recognized property types that the IRS recognizes listed in drop-down. You'll also see, of course, there's quite a few different built-in depreciation methods. There's about 50 depreciation methods. So if you do need to, you can actually create custom depreciation methods, and they would actually show up here in the drop-down. If you are taking advantage, for example, of the 179 bonus depreciation, that's also supported, so you can easily enter that information as well. But if you are using the accelerated 168 allowance, as I'm doing here with this particular sample asset, it will pre-populate that allowance information automatically. Now, in the case that you are importing assets from the system, you can bring in prior date information, beginning year-to-date information, beginning accum. All of the information in this area is all input information, and if you notice the areas below from current through date is all in blue. That's actually calculated data based on information you have here. Now, on your financial book, internal book, you can actually set your book default. So if you're using standard straight line full month, mid-month, or half year, whatever it may be, you can certainly do that as well. Now, some of the mass settings that you can do, by the way, I mentioned the maker's convention switch. So let's say, for example, in Q4 you went past that 40% placed in service. You can do a mass switch from the half-year convention to a mid-quarter convention. You can also do a mass switch of your 168 allowance settings. So you can easily do that for a group of assets, all the assets, whatever your workflow calls for. So quite easy to do in the system. And of course, if you're not doing the 168, you would simply choose that here, or you can simply choose a depreciation method that is not taking advantage of the 168, for example, going to an MT200 instead of an MA200. Now, with normal asset addition, one of the things you may want to do, because if you're doing a very high volume of asset addition, for example, but if you are using one of our Sage ERP products such as Sage 100 or 300 or 500 even, you can do asset addition from those products. For example, if you've got a high volume, you can actually do asset creation from invoices initiated from those other ERP products into this depreciation module. For your journal entry posting, you can also send that journal entry from this module over to those products. If you're using a third-party product, a non-Sage product, in other words, you can actually have a custom integration created that might be able to be completed for you from our folks at E2B or from our professional services group. So definitely reach out to James at E2B and find out what they can do for you as far as creating custom integration, and they can definitely contact us for anything that they're not able to accommodate. And I'm quite sure that James' team can actually help you with configuring this module to talk to our other Sage products, no problem. Now, if you're having, let's say, a lower volume of asset addition and you want to be able to add assets manually. Now, with creating all of those smart lists, sure, that makes it easy. I can go in here and use my smart list and point and click quite easily, but it's definitely easier and more accurate if you actually create templates. Now, some of the reasons you'll want to create templates, if you're doing asset creation, for example, from Sage 100, Sage 300, from the AP or PO side, but you've created templates here, you can actually access those templates from those applications. So instead of sending an asset over with just the information on the invoice, if you've created templates, they'll actually show up here. So for example, if I go into my computer template here that I created, I can apply that template here if I want to do a manual asset addition. And to create this template, I can simply populate all of the common information the template would have. So I would simply leave out things that are unique, like the asset ID field, serial number field, things like that. You can even populate depreciation methods, property types, book information across all the books. So whenever I'm adding a new computer, I would simply select my template from the drop-down, put in whatever information is unique, and I'm done. And that is going to save quite a bit of time. So if you got multiple of these, and you can actually replicate the asset once you've completed that first one. Now, with these templates being available to your Sage 100 to Sage 300, ERP side, you can apply the template as you're doing the asset creation there. And the tracking module can also access these templates as well as our CIP module. So let's say you're working on a project, spending is complete on a line item, you want to send it over to start depreciation, you can apply those templates as well. So it's very helpful in many ways to go ahead and do these templates. I just want to make sure I pointed that information out. So for example, if you look at some of the computers, for example, all of these laptops, iPads, I simply created the first one, using template. And for the others, I simply went and said, hey, let me replicate that. And let's say I got 10 new iPads in, create the first one using the template, populate, whatever information I need, and tell it how many copies to make. And I would simply then go in and change serial numbers or asset ID fields, and I'm done. So that would save quite a bit of time in doing that. Now, I want to talk a little bit about transfers and disposals. Inevitably, even if you don't have transfers, everyone is certainly going to be doing disposals periodically. I want to talk a little bit about that and show you how easy it is to do that. So let's say I want to go ahead and dispose of this particular iPad. I'm going to choose my disposal date. You've got a choice. I'm going to use today's date would be probably good. Let's do that. All right. This one was actually placed in service too recently. Can't do a disposal within the same year placed in service. So I need to go to an earlier asset. There we go. So let's say I'm going to go ahead and dispose of this asset. I'll use today's date. All right. And you have a choice, of course, of disposal methods. Now you can do sale, abandonment, taxable exchange, or just choose other. I'm going to go ahead and let's say I'm disposing of this asset by sale, because you probably will sell used technology equipment just for general purposes. So let's say I'm going to do a partial disposal that is supported, okay? So if you've got, let's say, 10 computers as a single line item or 10 pieces of furniture, whatever it may be, if you are doing a partial disposal, you would simply say yes here, enter the amount that you're actually going to be disposing. So for example, if I've got 10 iPads that are $1,000 a piece and I'm getting rid of 2 of them, I would simply put the equivalent amount of $2,000 that I'm going to dispose of, and it would actually reduce the remaining acquisition value for the remaining 8 to reflect that's what's remaining. So the remaining 8 would continue depreciating, the portion would be disposed of. So in this case here, I'm going to go ahead and do a full disposal of a single asset. And so let's say I'm going to sell this asset for $400, let's say. Just to throw a little curve in there, I'm going to go ahead and add in some expense of sale. So let's say I'm shipping this off to whoever I'm selling it or whatever entity I'm selling it to. I can actually calculate the gain-loss before committing to the disposal. So as you can see here, my gain-loss is calculated across all the books. And of course, there's going to be a difference in gain-loss because I'm using accelerated depreciation in my tax book. I'm doing straight line in my financial book, and so on. Now, I can actually view this worksheet before committing to the disposal. So this gives you an opportunity to make changes if you want to. And as you can see, for those of you that would be taking advantage of 168 accelerated or bonus 179 depreciation, that recapture information is taken into account here. All of the reports can be exported in a variety of formats. So for example, if you want to export it out to a PDF, Excel, even XML file, you can certainly do that. Now you don't have to worry about saving this information because once you've done the disposal, it's actually going to be available into the system, and I'll show you that. So I'm going to go ahead and confirm disposing this asset. And as you can see, it's taking me right to the transaction tab. But I do want to show a couple of things first before diving into that side of it. So if you notice here on the main asset detail, everything is grayed out. What that means is this asset has stopped depreciation as of the date of the disposal. So let's say I had done a partial disposal where I had 10 of these assets. I disposed of 2 of them. It would not be grayed out, and because you would still have assets remaining, a portion of the total to continue depreciation. You will notice the status has changed to disposed here. If this were a partial disposal, the status would change to partial. I also want to point out that you can add in the notes if you want to as to why you did the disposal. You can certainly attach, let's say, if you had a receipt from that shipping expense, you could certainly easily attach that. Because as I said, you can attach a variety of file formats so that you have the information here. So if you are going through an audit, auditor want to see, hey, I want to see that $45 expense receipt, you've got it right here. Now, you can also go to the history tab if you want to look at the audit trail, which you can choose the type of information that's tracked here so that you can see what has happened with this asset. So if you notice here, it shows the asset was disposed. It was disposed in the system today, but it'll also show separately the date of the gain loss calculation. So for example, if you're doing disposals quarterly, annually, or monthly, you could be doing disposal effective dates a month ago, 2 months ago, 6 months ago. So whatever makes sense for you. It'll also show who did it. So that's an important thing to be able to see. Now, you can go back to this transaction tab, review the transaction at any time. You can also go back here to the disposal worksheet and view that same worksheet I showed you earlier. That's why I said you don't have to worry about printing it or saving it because it's always available. You can go back and retrieve it whenever you need to. Now, as we know, mistakes happen. Someone could have given you the wrong tag number to dispose of, wrong serial number of assets. And if you need to be able to reverse this, you can. You simply go to the transaction tab, delete last transaction, and that will reverse the transaction. Now, you can restrict this selectively, as I showed you earlier in the company settings, in the security settings. You can actually choose who can do disposals, or you may allow someone to do disposals or transfers. You can choose who can reverse last transaction. So if you wanted a user to be able to do disposals but not be able to reverse transaction, you can select them to do that. So if you notice now, I've reversed that transaction, everything is back to depreciating as if nothing happened. You can go here to the history tab. However, it does not remove that entry. If you notice here, this transaction is still here where it shows it was disposed, but however, it creates a new entry that's going to show you that the transaction was reversed when it was done, and of course, who did it. Okay? So, all right. I'm going to jump ahead here into the reporting side because I do need to make sure I have some time to jump to the other modules to walk through that. One other thing to point out, it's very easy to run depreciation at any time frame that you want. You can go backwards and forwards in time. So you can easily choose all of the books if you choose to do so, and choose whatever date you want to run your depreciation for. And you can also limit who can run depreciation. So I'm currently depreciated through the end of July. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that as is. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the reporting side and run a few important reports. Now, for those of you that would be doing your monthly journal entry, for example, I'm going to go ahead and run the general ledger posting report just based on my current reporting period. And I'm going to go ahead and show you what that report looks like natively. So you can simply run it. If you're using a third-party system and you don't want to do a custom integration, you can simply run this report here. It gives you the capability, by the way. You can drill down, see all the details in that. And of course, you can export this out to a CSV format because most accounting software will import from CSV or some form of Excel or another to see what your system uses, and you can actually export your journal entry and import it. Now, for the case of those of you that are using our software, such as Sage 100, Sage 300, Sage 500, things like that, you can actually have this configured to send that journal entry over to that software. Now, I'm going to just show a couple more reports here. Depreciation expense report. You can actually run this completely unsorted, system number 1 through the end. But however, as I mentioned before, you can change the sort order where you're running this, let's say, for example, a sort and subtotal by location, and maybe below that by GL asset account number, so that you can see the different levels of sort. And this is going to give you a lot of flexibility. You can do that with a variety of these reports, and you may want to segment your reports based on, cost centers, departments, locations, asset class, whatever is more important to you. Now, when this report runs, one of the things you want to take a look at is all of the columns of data that will show up in this report, because one of the things you will be able to do in custom reporting is from within the software here, you can choose what columns of data are displayed in these reports. So for example, in this report, if you take a look at all of these columns of data, if you notice my prior through date, my current run, so my depreciation this run is for 1 month. Notice it is sorted as I selected by location, by GL account numbers and net totals. And then of course at the very end, you'll have all of your grand total information displayed. So you can export these reports, all of them as I stated, to a variety of formats, PDF, Excel, RTF, even Word documents as well. Now, let's say, for example, any of these reports, you need to be able to customize it. You can actually go in here and remove columns of data, add additional columns of data, so you can easily create custom reports. And if you save a custom report, it's actually going to show up here in yellow. For example, this is one that I added an additional column of data where I had a CFO that wanted the net book value on the end of the report. So I went ahead and did that. So quite easily to do. Now, a couple of important reports here that you can do for the tax side. You can generate your own fileable 4562. So for example, even if you are outsourcing to a third-party tax provider, you can easily do that. And this is an actual fileable tax form, okay? Both pages, and it'll even generate the worksheet if needed. You can easily export this out to a PDF, send this out to your tax provider. So that should save on billable hours that you can actually generate this yourself. 4797 data, you can easily run that as well, instead of having to calculate that in an Excel spreadsheet, for example. I'm just going to make that larger. Go to the second page. As you can see, all of your important information. Okay. You can generate quite a few standard reports, such as roll forward, net book value. All of those are built in. And of course, you can create your own custom reports, and you can even go all the way out to crystal reports and create a custom report to access as much information as you want. You'll have full access to every field in the database and creating a custom report. Now, I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the tracking module just to walk through that real briefly. So the tracking module, you're going to be using the same database, looking at the same company. Like I said, it does have access to the same information in the depreciation module. Now, this module will give you the ability to check out assets to individuals if you need to, track when they were checked out, when they're due back, and if they've been returned. So, which is why I'm getting this notification that, hey, I've got some overdue assets. So these are assets, same company as you noticed, that were checked out, checkout dates shown, what expected return date, and you can see they're not checked in. There's actually a report that you can look at. So I'm just going to look at all assets that you can easily see what assets you've checked out to someone, if they've been returned or not. So as you can see here, it'll show the asset ID, a description, when it was checked out, who checked it out, when it was due back, and the fact that it's not been returned. It'll even flag, for example, if something was returned but returned late. So if you do have a need, you have portable equipment, test equipment, things like that, you want to be able to track who has it, you certainly can. Now, all of that same information will be available that you saw as far as general information fields for your assets in this module. So for example, if I go to that same delivery van, you'll see I have all of the same information I saved before in that asset detail. All of the templates are also available, but there are some additional fields. So if you notice, all of those fields are there, but there are some additional fields such as acquisition date that wasn't on the other one. All of those general information fields are still available. But however, you do have some additional tracking only field. So for example, at one of your manufacturing facility, you've got an asset manager at that location, and they may need to track some additional details in this view that you don't care about in the accounting department as far as your depreciation side. They would be able to utilize these fields for things like that, for example. If you notice here, though, there's no book information field. So it will not be dangerous for you to have an asset manager at one of your manufacturing facilities, for example, that's handling, tracking, and doing physical inventory, things like that, but you don't want them being able to have any impact on the depreciation side. They can't even see it. So that's something else that might be helpful. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to be able to walk through doing a full physical inventory, but I will certainly talk through it so you get a good understanding of that. By the way, all of the groups you created, if you notice, are all available here as well. So just to walk through what that process would be like for doing a full physical inventory. So for example, you would be able to go in and define an inventory of what subset of assets you're going to do. So let's say I'm going to do an inventory of my computers at one of my locations. You would define the inventory, who it's assigned to. And a dynamic inventory simply means that you're going to identify, assets you're supposed to have that are supposed to be at a certain location, and you're just going to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and select the subset of assets I created earlier, my Store 1 computers. I'm going to go ahead and load a subset of information that I want to push out to the handheld scanners. Now, currently, the type of scanners supported is your handheld barcode readers. So I'm going to go ahead and just pop that up here. Now, the release that's coming out in October will have support for mobile Android devices. So if you've got an Android tablet, an Android smartphone, you'll be able to do that. Future date, we don't have a release date yet. Apple mobile devices will be supported. So that's all coming in the future. And the reason I want to point this out is, for example, if you're doing a full physical inventory, you would be able to actually go in and scan your assets. I'm just going to do a quick search here so you can see the available field. Let me go here to a subset of assets that I have here. I'm going to go to my text files, and I'm going to go to this. I'm going to just grab a barcode number for an asset just to simulate scanning it so you can see what the assets would look like. If you're scanning it on one of these handheld devices, I'm scanning, verifying the assets there. You can actually make changes. Let's say you find an asset in a different location from where it's supposed to be, you would be able to do that as well. If, for example, you do have some new equipment drop shipped to a location, you can actually, stick a barcode on there, start entering the information on that asset to actually be able to start the asset addition process as well. So I'm not going to have sufficient time to walk through that because I still do want to get over to the CIP module to show you that, but just to talk through how this would work. Once you've done that scanning of all of the assets at the location you're doing, you'll be able to receive that data back and from the handheld scanner. In the case of the handheld scanner, you're going to be connecting back to a computer that has this tracking module software on it via USB or whatever means you're connecting, and actually retrieve that data and do a reconciliation process. In the case of the Android devices, you're going to be doing that remotely via OneDrive. So let's say someone is at a site in another state, they're using an Android device to do it. You're actually going to be using a OneDrive account where you never have to physically connect it to the system, where they would simply go out, do the physical inventory. That information is put in a file in OneDrive, and then this system would then be able to retrieve that information to do that reconciliation process, where you're going to be able to act on, okay, assets found with no changes, no problem. Asset with changes, you can accept and update the changes in the database from that. And for new additions, you can actually say, yeah, I want to go ahead and add this asset to our fixed asset database, and I want to go ahead and apply a template, for example, if I've got a template made for that, so that'll populate all that information, and then you would actually be able to do a reconciliation report showing everything that was done, assets that had changes, assets with no changes, or assets that were added to the system. Okay, so just to give you an idea of what a reconciliation report may look like, let's see if I still have one saved. You'll be able to actually view that information. So this is from the last physical inventory I did, where I had quite a few assets I didn't find because I chose not to. So anything showing with an exception code of N was not found. O is with no changes, is actually a key code on the N. And then so I actually added an asset, which is I. So in the case of assets not found, what you would want to do is actually probably save this out to Excel or something like that, where you can actually circulate this around to your other sites. So you can have folks who are at those locations can say, hey, listen, I'm missing a computer or a few laptops or whatever it may be, equipment at site A. Can you check your site, see if those assets are there? Here's the tag number, here's all the information, and they can simply check off, hey, it's there at this location. Then you can update the information in your database. Now, if you truly cannot find these assets, they've really gone missing, you can choose to inactivate them pending further disposition, where you may have a case of fraud or theft going on, and you've got to act based on your internal company policies, and then actually do a proper disposal of those assets in the system. So one of the things I want to make sure I pointed out. So that's just kind of the high-level overview of this module. Now, when assets are sent over, they will show up in the depreciation module. I'm just jumping back briefly to show you that in a group called incomplete assets, because since that particular module does not have access to the book fields, they will come over as incomplete assets. So if you notice from that last inventory I did where I added a couple of iPads, this is an example of one of them that was sent over, even though I use a template, because it does not have access to the book field, it cannot complete that. So someone in the accounting department would then need to go ahead and verify whatever the acquisition value was and place it in service at the date, and then you'd be ready to start depreciating. Because typically a site manager at one of your remote locations may not have access to the invoice anyway and does not know this information and does not know what depreciation method you'd want to use, so you would be the one actually completing this particular task. Okay. Now, you can, by the way, send assets over from the planning module, which I'm about to do, and I want to show you that as well. If you send assets over from that module and apply a template, like I did with this particular printer from the planning module, it will come over with all the information, because the planning module, when you apply a template to send an asset over to start depreciation, will populate everything. I want to point that out. This is for handling any type of works in progress that you have that your assets are not going to be ready to place in service, until sometime later, and you can even actually place those assets in service before the project is complete. All right, so for example, let me open a sample project, okay, and we will be able to talk about that briefly. Now, like in the depreciation module, it's going to give you a brief overview of what's going on with this particular project. Your start and end date. I can see what's spent in the project and what's unspent dollar-wise. I can see what's capitalized, expense, even pending transactions. I can also get a quick view, for example, looking at my spending comparison to budget, my actual spending amount, my original budget, and let's say at some point during the project, you estimate that you are going to run over budget. You don't have to actually change your original budget info. You can create a revised budget, and the system will actually track your performance against both your original and revised budget. So you can see where you actually are against what your new budget is, as well as where you actually are against your original spending guidelines. You can quickly see what the spending has been throughout the life of the project. Okay. And you can also look at your actual versus physical percent complete against your actual spending as well as your original and revised budget. So that's some good handy information. So just to get a high level of the hierarchy of how this all works, if you look at each of these line items, each line item, as you see, has their own budget, right, which rolls up in total against the total budget for the project, okay? So each line item is what can actually be sent over to become a fixed asset. So for example, you're doing a building renovation, your HVAC unit may be in service and ready to go long before the project is complete. You can actually send it over to start depreciation, okay? So if you notice, it'll track your budget for the particular line items, okay? And you can see number of transactions and some other useful information about each line item. So for example, in the case of this building expansion, I've already sent that over to the depreciation module, but this one has quite a few transactions, so I want to use this one as an example. Now, you can customize all of these fields, by the way, to what makes sense for how you want your projects to flow. Of course, you've got your start and stop date. You can use your same GL account codes that you're using in your ERP accounting software, as well as depreciation module, or you might use a separate account code for your CIP. You can have capitalized or expensed line items here. And of course, my original budget, which I later revised and is tracking my performance against both. I've customized some of my fields here, for example, to track an approval process. You can track who the contractors are, project managers, a variety of information. So if you want to take a look below this asset now with its original budget, these are the transactions below that that are actually rolling up to the cost, of this overall for this line item. So I can actually go in and edit these transactions, take a look at the information, and these fields as well can be customized. Okay. Asset information. So this particular one I've already sent over, so I can't modify it. So I'm going to actually go into another asset that's not been sent. So for example, looking at this HVAC unit, the asset information, this is where you would say, yes, spending is complete, date completed. I can even set my place and service date and tell it what template I want to use for the asset creation. So in a case like this where the asset, I've said spending is complete, I can apply a template, modify my description. If it's something I want to split into multiple assets, I can do that and set the values individually for how I want to split it or make it equal. So you have quite a bit of flexibility with how that is done. Okay. So once any of these line item spelling is complete, you can send it over. So if you notice the status code of S has been sent over to start depreciation. Status of C means spending is complete, but it's not been sent over. Status of A is just active. I haven't finished my transactions. By the way, just so you know, if you have large projects with multiple invoices, all of these transactions can be imported. You can import transactions en masse and determine which line items, even in multiple projects, those invoices need to go to become transactions. And let's say for the assets that spending are complete and I do want to send them over to start depreciation, I can actually, select whatever ones are complete, start the asset creation process, where I'm going to tell it, hey, go ahead and create these assets, which company to send it to if you're multiple companies like my databases, and go ahead and start the asset creation, and they would then show up in the depreciation module ready to start depreciation. There is some reporting available that you can either see, for example, a project status on the reports, as well as some other basic information about what's going on with the project. And I can cover that more in detail at another time. Now, I just wanted to point out again the hierarchy of this, that yes, this is the total project. The line items are what you want to set for the items that you do want to become fixed assets. You can also track capitalized as well as expensed assets. So your choice with how you configure this, and there's great training available for the entire solution with how this interacts in Complete. But unfortunately, due to the limited time restriction here, I can just give you a high level of all of these portions of the solution.
Yeah, that was fantastic. You should be able to see my screen now. Just want to, first of all, thank you for an excellent presentation. Like I said before, I mean, it's been a while since I've seen Sage Fixed Assets. It's certainly come a long way. You know, we work with a lot of companies that have a lot of assets, so a lot of them have Sage Fixed Assets today. The companies that don't, you're going to get a huge ROI from having this product. If you have more than 50 or 100 assets, trying to manage the depreciation alone is going to be a pain in the butt for you. And just imagine, the errors that are going to occur from data entry and trying to do it all in Excel spreadsheets. Excel's got its place in the world, but I don't think it's places in depreciation. That's my opinion. We'll come to some questions, but before that, I want to just point out we do have another product that we do offer. We'll cover this in a different webinar. It's called Anytime Assets. It's a product we developed. It does a lot of things that Sage Fixed Assets doesn't. Some things we do is really around asset tracking. There is that tracking module within Sage Fixed Assets, but we kind of take it a step further with movement. So we can have transactions, things like an issue to an employee. We can actually have that automated with barcoding to scan it, scan the employee badge. We've done a lot of work with RFID tags as well with assets. We've even done some things internally with our calibration lab on that side of the business where we can load up a bunch of our assets to take out on site. With RFID tags, the minute we go through the door, we've got radio signals and antennas there that read those assets, transact them out to our vans. We put them in the van. We then go out on site. We have the antennas and mobile devices out on the vans. We're able to take those assets out in the field, use them for on-site calibrations. And then when we go to load the van up to bring them back into the facility, kind of the same thing, right? We bring them back through those antennas, and we can identify if we happen to have accidentally left an asset out in the field. It'll give us an alert. We go get it, make sure everything's accounted for, bring them back in, wheel them through the door, and we now know they're back available in-house. So we're doing a lot of really, really cool things, I think, with asset tracking and mobility. We got a lot of things with notifications, any of the data in the asset database. We're able to do email alerts on things like cal dues. So you've got a bunch of assets that are coming due. You can set an alert that'll go out to maybe your calibration or quality manager to notify you which assets are coming due, who the providers are for those services. Attachments, just like the Sage Fixed Assets product, we can do things like photos, multiple photos so you can see the product itself. Maybe you want to see it in the case, on the shelf, manual, certificates of calibration, warranties, and we'll actually do a lot of this service for you. So, if you were to come on board with us with either Sage Fixed Assets or Anytime Assets, we've got a group that'll go out and actually inventory your assets for you, take out a webcam and a tablet, take the pictures, get all the information in the system for you as well. One of the newer pieces that we've added to our product is preventative maintenance. So with the assets, you can develop your own service plans. Those can be based on hours, meter readings. We can do integrations to machines. In some cases, they actually take those readings off of the machines if it's like a stamping press, something like that. Or maybe with mileage, every time they come back in to transact that, we require them to enter the mileage, and then we'll kick off preventative maintenance, oil change, that kind of stuff, at various intervals. We can do the assignments, scheduling. Obviously scheduling is a pretty big piece, especially when you're looking at manufacturers, because you're looking to take a piece of equipment, offline for your preventative maintenance. So you want to be able to balance that against the production you have scheduled out there on the floor. And those of you that know us, this is what we do, right? We're supply chain people, we're asset people. So you got questions, we'll help you through it. Go ahead and put Wayne's information back up here on the screen. Wayne, a couple of questions I have. I know at the very end we didn't have a whole lot of time to cover the former construction in progress or the planning module. Can you give us maybe some examples of how companies would potentially use that? I think the one example you had was a building, building on an expansion or maybe a new production facility. But are there some other examples you've seen for where that might be a really good fit for our customers?
Sure. Some of the folks that I've talked with were the type of projects that they had going, for example, were, aviation manufacturing type environment, for example, where they have a variety of, pretty high-tech 3D milling machines, things like that, and calibration equipment. And let's say they're building out a new setup where, they're basically designing or building onto existing equipment. And sometimes those are fairly lengthy projects, various steps to it. So they actually will use that, and as various pieces of the manufacturing or assembly line comes online, then they place it in service, as its own individual asset. Another environment I've seen folks doing that are companies, for example, and this is probably an odd one, that they actually lease or build rail cars or use in the oil and gas industry these large vacuum type trucks that actually get a lot of moisture or used in conjunction with drilling. So they'll use these particular type vehicles, manufacturing in one place, transferring it to a subsidiary later. And as it takes months to build one of these specialized type vehicles, they'll even, use our planning module for doing things like that. And then once the entire vehicle is complete, place it in service. So you'll see it for anything from building renovations, property management folks, for example, with leasehold improvements as they're redoing, commercial buildings or residential buildings that they're going to be placing online at some point later. So a very, very wide scope of types of projects, even to some extent in software development. So it's a very broad scope of the types of projects that you can do. The main thing to take away is that if it's a project that's going to take some amount of time where you're going to be putting out expenses to acquire these various pieces of the project that will later you want to be able to place in service to depreciate for tax purposes or financial book purposes later, that's basically the types of projects that you can do.
No, that's a great point. A lot of our customers, Wayne, have those types of requirements. They're bringing on maybe a new facility, and maybe that project they can manage the whole thing, but they have assets they're going to deploy. Might be an assembly line or something inside the factory. They can put all of those costs that go into basically the creation of those assets, all the components, the power supplies, the equipment, even some of the labor and consulting that goes into that can all become part of that cost of the asset overall. So I think that's a great module that very few people, quite honestly, know is available from Sage. I think it's one of the few products on the market that can actually handle that. A couple other questions for you. I know this, but I want to make sure everybody on the webinar today understands this as well from a labeling perspective, that there's a lot of different options out there. And you guys do have some labeling partners you work with. I'm assuming most of those labels are going to be very durable. There's some different options available. If you can maybe talk about that a little bit.
Sure. There's actually different types of label that you can use. Some folks will actually get them through us, or you can buy them from a third party. But you can do anything from like laminated type weatherproof labels. Let's say if you're in a warehouse environment, there's even the ones that are I believe like a metal type finish. So whatever type of labels you really need for your environment, there's great flexibility with that. But the main thing to remember with that is that our system currently needs barcode 39 as the format. So that's the one thing to ensure that you are using barcode 39 format.
Yeah, and that's pretty standard. I think everything's code 39 or code 39 compatible. From a couple other questions here. One real quick, obviously the U.S. government never stands still, and there are tax law changes that do affect asset depreciation. I'm assuming that customers that are on Sage Fixed Assets, one of the other benefits is that the software has the updates and you guys monitor those changes and will roll out updates appropriately.
Absolutely. Now, typically we'll have 2 updates per year. So you'll get typically an update that comes out sometimes after the summer, like September, October. And this year that update is going to come out October 17th, I believe. And that's usually feature updates, enhancements, things like that. Now, the release that comes out in January comes out shortly after the IRS finalizes any tax rule changes. So if you're on the business care plan, you will get that update annually. So you'll want to ensure that you're keeping your software up to date, and you will have all of the latest IRS tax rules for the U.S. as well as the Canadian tax rules.
Perfect. Perfect. And I just want to kind of wrap up, because I know some of the questions we'll get from customers and prospects looking at the product. Implementation is always something people ask. That's something that you'd be working with our team on. If there's some areas where we don't have expertise, that's an area where we bring in Sage. Maybe it's the construction in progress, the planning piece, or maybe it's a particular question around tax laws. But your implementation can really range. It's going to depend greatly on the number of assets you have. Really, that's probably the main piece here, and the different modules that you're looking to implement. But that could be anywhere from days up to a week, sometimes multiple weeks. But it is a fairly straightforward process, and all of that we would do via time and material. You guys would have an estimate up front for the implementation services. I do want to mention as well, we have a lot of customers that are on Sage products, as well as some that are on other platforms. The integration is really nice. I know they'll vary depending on the platform you're on, but if you're using a Sage product like a Sage 500, for example, when you're buying an asset, there's ways that we can automate that so that that purchase from within the Sage 500 system or the Sage 100 system does create the asset within the fixed asset system, and then you can go ahead and start depreciating it. So that's a real nice kind of time saver there, a nice benefit from owning multiple Sage products. And then last but not least, want to just mention the fact that Sage Fixed Assets, some of you may have known it from its previous life as FAS. It is the de facto standard in the industry for fixed asset depreciation. Been on the market for decades, literally. So if you've been out there in the world and you know FAS, this is the next iteration of it, if you will. It is essentially the same product functionally, but Sage has certainly done a lot to improve it and take it into the 21st century. So we are way over. I want to thank you all for taking the time. I want to turn it over to Wayne for any closing remarks, and just thank him for an excellent presentation today.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I greatly appreciate your time. And for those of you that were not able to make it, definitely we are glad that we did record it, so you can still reach out to James or directly to myself with any questions you have. And absolutely, we do have a great partnership with E2B Technologies. So any challenges you have with getting migrated over to using the solutions, we are actually there for you to help with that implementation all the way through full life cycle. So I appreciate your time today and look forward to hearing from you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Wayne, and thank you all for taking the time out, and we'll see you on a webinar very soon. Take care.